Welcome to AURN Digital's Roundtable on Black Rock. My name is Reginald Duvivier, and I am cool.
My name is Child Coleman, and I am a punk.
My name is Bruce Mack, and I am a composer.
My name is Nia I'man Smith, and I am the Black Connection.
What does the future of Afro-Punk and Black Rock look like? A deep question.
It is. I think I'm going to start by saying often over a period of time, styles and the change and evolution in music and art forms can often be seen in theater. And theater I've always liked because it encompasses all the art forms, visual arts, performance art, and all the variables in each of them. You go from everything from building, props to sound design. And when I look at it like that, I think of the technology that's involved and required, for that to take place. So I think Afro-Punk and Black Rock will eventually, if not already, start to reside in theater or start to develop and evolve in theater along with the technology. And technology will determine a lot of how it looks and exists moving forward. So hard to say how it'll actually look, but I think technology will be a big determining factor in that. I think just looking at how it was presented, Afro-Punk, through the film, the documentary, a lot of people didn't see that beforehand, other than people who were, totally involved. But it was that technology that brought out and someone thinking about how to really put it out there. I think it will, again, find a way through technology to exist. I'm still, thinking about the question itself. To be more specific, it's hard to say how that would look. I can think of it as a talking head, just kind of like, this is Afro-Punk now.
Yeah.
You can't see nobody doing it, but you have these digital images doing it. I hope it doesn't go to that. 'Cause I still want to see people actually doing it. But I think it will reside in technology, and maybe we can build on it from that aspect. I don't know.
Yeah. When I heard your question, I was thinking about the Yasin Bey, or at the time, Mos Def quote from Black on Both Sides, where he has that opener about hip hop, and he has this quote about, people act like hip hop is this giant, giant in the mountain, and it's like hip hop is going to go where the people are going. So, I feel the same approach with Afro-Punk and Black Rock. It's going to go where the people are going. If we're moving in a direction, or if we're moving in several directions where we're really thinking about, state violence and opposing that as like a main thing that we're thinking about, it's going to go there. If we're thinking about getting blinged out and, getting cashed out, it's going to go there. So I think that there's multiple places where it can go, just depending on where we are and the multiple places where we find ourselves as Black people and responding to the place and time that we're in.
I think as a festival, another important thing that Afro-Punk serves is, people talk a lot about safe spaces. It's a place to escape that daily strife. And that day you feel free and you feel okay, you feel you can let your guard down a little bit. I don't think that will go away. It'll change as it becomes more commercial and it becomes bigger, and maybe it'll be a festival that lasts a week, or maybe it's already traveling the world. So we see where Afro-Punk is going with that. I think the future of Black Rock is more kids will pick up guitars, and more girls will pick up guitars, and more people will feel like whatever way they present themselves or want to live, there's a place for them to be. And I do see that trickling down with younger Black people already. So that's the future to me. It's like, oh, you want to play rock and roll, but you also like electronics. 20 years ago that was frowned upon. Now we have Flying Lotus at Black events. So I think the future is, like Bruce said, it's technology, and it's also just really feeling liberated. Like there's no rules.
I'm wondering if it's In that question, do you all feel like it's still like sort of underground in any way? And thinking of how to move forward?
I don't think it's underground. I think it's outsider, the same way Burning Man is outsider. Burning Man is huge, and you have to be rich to go there, but it's not underground.
Agreed.
It's not socially acceptable because it's decadent and crazy things happen there. But it's an outlier. It's a antisocial thing that has a huge following.
Yeah.
And so does rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know, so does Afro-Punk, except Afro-Punk has become more commercial. But like Coachella wasn't cool in the beginning. It was like a weird desert festival in the mud. Look what happened with that. So I see Black Rock also because of what's happening with technology with hip hop. And when sampling went away and people had to be more innovative, I feel like more crossover happened outside of commercial sounds. And maybe that's why it's happening in fashion too. Maybe that's why, you know, like young black kids are wearing metal shirts because it's rebellious. Look, he's wearing that devil stuff. Like, they don't know what it is, but they know it's edgy. And that's curiosity and adventure.
Yeah. And I think in some ways the commercialism has led to it, still known as an outsider space, but I think about the fact that my nephew, who is 22, I think just turned 22, but he recently told me he's been to Afro-Punk and he's planning to go again. And he's not into punk, he's not into, you know, rock. But I was like, how did you find out about Afro-Punk? I'm like, how do you know to come? He's like, I went to, you know, go see Solange.
Right.
So I think that, you know, these mainstream acts are bringing in this different generation of a younger audience, combined with, like, you know, those who are there for like that punk rock, black rock experience, but then also folks who are listening to more of what's happening in the mainstream.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think going back to your point, the idea that, you know, it's even the idea of guitars, let's just say. It's the idea of black rock itself is malleable, where you don't necessarily have to have guitars to be punk rock. Like Death Grips is all synths and somebody screaming, and that's more punk rock than, let's say, pretty much 99% of the bands with guitars you hear on the radio today. Going back to the idea of where I think with black rock versus Afro-Punk, you know, black rock is a specific kind of ideal, but at the same time, it's an ideal that shifts and changes at will, and it's not necessarily just about to have the drummer, the bassist, and the singer / screamer.
Right.
And I think the idea that, you know, that there's a future to it, there'll always be a future to it, because there'll always be, I think, black folks at the epicenter playing, you know, instruments.
Right.
You know, enough where you kind of see like a turnaround, because like Afro-Punk has Thundercat, who's pretty much, you know, if you look at him, he's very much of a punk.
Right.
But at the same time, the music he plays is pretty much, you know, yacht rock / jazz.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's the idea of the future is less being about pigeonholed.
Right.
Although what I wonder is that as far as, you know, black rock music in general seems to be on the wane. So I wonder how that kind of interacts with what's happening in the black community also.
In my observation, because I also DJ a lot of alternative rock, the rock bands that we don't hear on the radio tour incessantly. Like Algiers, black-fronted, political, heavy rock band. Are they on the radio? No, but they're huge. The same way TV on the radio blew up, but nobody in New York was playing them on the radio. You go to the West Coast, whole different thing.
Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of bands like that now. And kids have disposable income. They go to those shows. Instead of seeing a band like that in a small venue, they're seeing them for the first time at a huge festival. So it's kind of like, maybe with Spotify and everything, they have a built-in audience already. There's a curiosity there, definitely. Like, I'm always pleasantly surprised when I see a lot of young people at shows now, because 10 years ago, that was not the case at all. And I think Afro-Punk is influencing getting kids out and more curious about what we are doing. It's about representation again.
As far as, but to push even further, with the kids kind of going out, do you see like there's a direct, because, you know, for the most part, we're adults, you know, we've been in our respective careers for a period of time. What do you see with like the 15-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the 16-year-olds? Like, how do you think they're taking to that culture? Are they embracing it or pushing it away? Is it something where, is there a class behind, let's say, us?
I mean, my observation is limited at the moment to all ages shows I go to in Brooklyn. But I do see those kids having a broader palette. Like you might, like when the punk band is done, maybe in the front room the DJ is playing trap, and they're staying for both. So that's like an interesting observation, and I feel like that happens at Afro-Punk. They have a stage with trap DJs, and then they have the stage with like Fever 333 and like my band, and it's no one's leaving. They're kind of absorbing both. So I don't know what's behind it except maybe youth and curiosity, but it's interesting because when I was their age, that was not the case. You stayed here or you stayed there. So there's definitely a shift.
I feel like there used to be a lot more scene policing. And,
Yes.
And everybody was very much like, you're not as punk as I am.
Right. You're not punk. You have
know,
those boots on.
Yeah, I
How
saw Brad-
dare you?
Yeah, I saw Brad Range in '86 and CBGBs. What are you talking about, bro?
Right.
You know.
I feel like the scene policing is still happening, but it's the older fans. Like especially like I never was really in the New York hardcore scene, but my band plays those shows where sometimes I walk in and I'm like, it's all skinheads and me and my bass player are the only black women here, but we're gonna get through this. And those guys are very, I don't want to say all of them, but there's definitely the attitude in that scene that is, oh yeah, well you're okay because you're playing with so and so, or you're okay because you have the right polo on, and I'm kind of like, it's music, really at this age, but I don't feel that same level of judgment from younger fans. So.
Well, it was interesting. I just wanted to bring it out. There was the element of those boots.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of like division, some racism stuff in New York, and that came out of like the whole thing. Those boots used to be called Jolly Stompers, and they were part of skinheads in gangs and whole rumble thing during the whole 70s and 80s thing. So
yeah.
I know personally, even when I went, I was doing shows and performing. And when I'd show up and there was the skinheads, it'd be one thing, because we grew up having to deal with it. But if they had those boots on and stuff, it was like, oh, there's going to be an issue tonight, everybody. So, make sure this is like this and this is like that. And it wasn't until I was just got acclimated to that scene for a while that it was like I got comfortable with it. It was like, because I knew that a lot of them were just kind of confused with that also. But then some of them were still carrying that element to it,
It's weird because when I go out, I still go out to a lot of primarily white shows, and I think a lot of those kids, and they should know better in 2019, but I think a lot of them don't really know what they're doing and exactly what the things they do represent.
Right.
Because I remember I accidentally fell into a weird hole. I went to a venue and a band went on stage, and one of them was wearing a Burzum t-shirt. And Burzum was basically black metal in the early 90s where they actually killed somebody and the leader was a Nazi. But I think that kid probably, I don't think he necessarily knew. I didn't feel unsafe, but it's like, oh, this is cool, this is edgy. And I think the idea is because, if you're a white person, you can do that because it's edgy, you're disconnected. There's no violence going to come to you.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is badass, this is quote unquote evil.
Yeah.
Right.
Where for a person of color, I immediately, my antenna went up and I was like,
Exactly.
all right,
Yeah.
who am I dealing with? What's this kind of, like
Yeah.
how? And it's kind of interesting because I wonder if those kids now are kind of going through those same exact things, if those teams are still kind of popping up, particularly with the way the world's going in a particular kind of white way, a right-wing, white kind of way, as far as politics is concerned. But it's weird because I think at the same time, what's been, I guess, the best thing about Afro-Punk, like you said, is the fact it's a safe space. Where it's blatantly, if you're queer, then so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. If you're not, if you're a bigot, if you're a racist, whatever, stay at home.
Right.
And I think what's positive about it is the idea is, and again, it can be very positive. I feel like those scenes of where, you would show up and it's like, oh, I don't know, what kind of punks are these? Are these like the oi punks?
Right.
Or are these just the regular, hardcore, New York City hardcore, the tough guy bros? It's like, there's a huge chasm. One guy, we can mosh and shake hands. The other guy, bottle might come into my face just because I exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that, do you think that scene is kind of still do you think there's that same infiltration in those scenes as you had back then? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better?
I think there's some transition. Transitions are often a little bumpy in general. But I do think some of that still exists. I think you're probably going to see a little bit more of that as you have, for instance, let's say you have like like Bensonhurst. And you have a few kids who have gone to high school and have started to hang out with a lot of the kids who are doing like Afro-Punk and black kids. It's like, hey, this is what these kids are doing. It's happening. They bring it in, sort of like the way a lot of hip hop went down. They bring it in the community. Then you're gonna have folks there in those communities that kind of reject it a little bit, or just got an attitude because these black folks coming over here playing in our club, and and starting to date and things like that. You have that. I think a lot of that's going to take place. I think some of that's already taking place. So there's going to be a struggle. Basically, what I'm saying, I think there's going to be a little bit of a little struggle there for the acceptance of it all. Because I think I think in some point in some of these our talks, we've mentioned how a lot of what we do is becoming more acceptable. We talked about how it's being easy even within our own communities, and then folks are starting to recognize the difference in what we're doing. And I think one of the things that kind of like stuck in my mind was, I think Honey Child had mentioned how police had saw folks at the Afro-Punk festival and were being like kind, as opposed, just because I think a lot of that has to do with just a different look. It's like, oh, where are these kids coming from? This is a different thing. I haven't seen these kids before, as opposed to the things they've created in their mind,
right?
About who we are and so on. So I think there's going to be a little tussle there, and I know for a fact, just living around New York City and growing up in New York City, it's been segregated. It's been a lot of little pockets. Yeah. I lived in, I think, most of those pockets, where it was like borderline. If you cross Arthur Avenue up in the Bronx and you get over here, you're going to deal with like these little knucklehead little, Italian kids. I personally had, was hell with like, big old knife around the neck and the whole nine, and had the kids that we went from school all on the bus, and they stayed on the bus and a few friends jumped off. So we've experienced that. And then I live in Staten Island now, and you can see a lot of that there. But there's change happening, and people are accepting it, and people are trying to explain things more. People are like gradually getting past their own ignorances. Yeah. I see that happening overall. And in the music is that key. No matter what it is, it's that key. And I think it opens up more when folks see the diversity in black folk. We're not just doing like the straight R&B. We're not just doing straight jazz, and it's open up. Thundercat, I think, was a great point. Yes. Mentioning Thundercat, because he definitely covers that spectrum. And he's very inviting in that sense, and very supportive of folks all around. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's still there a little bit. Yeah.
Honey Child, at the venues, at these all ages venues that you're playing at, do you notice like an adoption of that language from Afro-Punk around like no fat phobia, no homophobia, no transphobia?
A lot of those places already had those principles because they're more DIY spaces and more LGBT friendly and more diverse, so it's not new to them. But they're anti-Afro-Punk because they feel Afro-Punk is kind of exploiting it in a way as a commercial idea.
I went to a punk show recently, and so I'm just there. It was me and my black friend. He had to leave early because he had to go to work the next day because he was a little bit older. And so I'm there by myself, and a teenager, maybe she was like 19, a white teenager came to me and warned me because there were two skinheads in the pit, which I found fascinating because, and you can't really see me if you're listening to this, I'm a huge black dude, so I just found it hilarious how this young girl was warning me to be careful out there. And so and what was cool about that was the fact of where, like I kind of did before, how when you go to a black freedom, no white space, you kind of look to give the head nod to everybody, like, oh, we're all on the same page. It was this white woman who kind of reached out and said, hey, watch out there. And I was like, oh, that's kind of, and even though it should have been these guys are here, I was like, oh, that's so cute, that's so kind of heartwarming. So like it's like I hope that we're kind of like becoming more open and understanding, because like I said, I think at times the reason, and I'm going to excuse a lot of behavior, but there is a certain segment where I think they would be more aligned to be allies if they knew what was happening. I think the idea is kind of getting to people's head. It's like, hey, these things have always existed. You just haven't been able to see it because society has shielded you.
Yes. Yes.
How is physical gentrification in places such how has physical gentrification in places like Brooklyn affected the Afro-Punk?
Well, wasn't it last year that some newcomers to the neighborhood near Commodore Barry Park actually put an ad in the paper complaining about Afro-Punk? It was like a noise complaint. I can't remember what paper it was in. They're like, oh, there's this festival and they have it every year and it's terrible and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, you just got here. Like, you can't leave town for one day. You can't go to the movies, really.
Yeah.
And this is when, I think it was when it was still free. So, lots of kids were there. And I don't know. I've been to a lot of festivals. I used to work at Electric Zoo. I've never even seen a fight at Afro-Punk. Not once. So to have someone new to the neighborhood complain is pretty intense. It's like, it's not a good look. But, that's my 2 cents on it.
It's something where there's a bar called Old Tobacco in Crown Heights, and they recently had a hearing because they were going up for their liquor license, and like I said, similar, where they've been there for a couple of years. It's very friendly, very quiet, more of a lounge. Clientele would be what quote unquote respectability politic would be very respectability politic friendly,
Right.
And basically the neighbors complained, and even in their complaint you kind of saw it was less about the bar, but more like, oh, you've got drunk people coming out, you've got this, you've got that, where the only real discerning way that they knew they were from that bar would have to be black people,
Right.
which I found ironic because it's a black neighborhood. You really can't tell they're coming from that bar, and I've been there. It's not really that kind of like we're doing 80 rounds of Patron shots. It's just like it's dance and you can do cocktails.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, like, as far as the gentrification, is there a way for there to be a balance between, like, the newcomers and the old comers? Is it up to us to kind of make them safe, or is it up to them to kind of understand that, hey, you came here for a reason?
They just got to go back to Toronto or wherever. I mean, it's just so ridiculous with the policing around black space that's happening. I mean, we can also think similarly to what's going on with DC right now with the campaign with Go Go and don't mute DC.
Right.
This constant policing of our cultural spaces. It's out of hand. It's ridiculous, and Honey Child, for you to speak of, like, there's this noise complaint and you're going to write it in the paper, like when there's this liberatory space where black folks are getting free and feeling comfortable.
Supported by the borough president.
Yeah. It's like,
and the mayor.
Yeah, and the mayor. It's like, how dare you? I really think the onus for us in that case is just to go hard. Like, no, it's not. You're not going to happen. Like in DC, we're going to get out on the streets. We're going to have a whole go-go show every Tuesday, I think that's the only way to combat it, because this hand-holding approach, it just is not going to work. I don't think it's going to work at this point. We've tried to hold hands,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And I think and going back to your point of going hard, I think it's easy to kind of come to a new neighborhood and fall in love with the things you fall in love with, the reason why you moved in the first place, and then something happens and then it's like, oh, well, now it's different. I think the idea needs to be reminded that the reason why everybody comes to these spaces is because it's multicultural, Afro-Punk included. And I think the idea of where you kind of show up and is you want to kind of change the scene, I think they're very short-sighted because that's why they're there in the first place.
Yeah, you're coming for the culture.
Yeah, and in 5 years' time, they'll move elsewhere because it's not the same. It's not the same edge I had. It's when I came here. One of my kids grew up in this neighborhood, and now it's all this. I'm going to go down to the next space and gentrify.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining AURN Digital's Black Rock Roundtable. Tune in next time.